All right, welcome to today's webinar, everyone with Ordr. The title of today's webinar is Building a Successful Medical Device Security Program, Security Plus IT plus HTM. Today's webinar will be presented by Ordr, and you will be hearing from Eric Ross, the System Director of Clinical Engineering at mHealth Fairview, Ben Stock, Director of Healthcare Product Development at Ordr, and David Yaeger, the Biomed Security DBA at ProHealth Care. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Kamisha Bruce. I'm Acting Chief Biomedical Engineer at the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center, and I've worked for the VA for the past 7 years. Some logistics. All attendees have their microphones muted during the presentation. Questions to panelists must be submitted via the Q&A feature in the Zoom at any time. If there is an urgent issue, please use the chat feature to communicate with the panelists or myself. And please remember to complete the webinar evaluation after attending. The link will be provided at the end. Our first panelist is Benjamin Stock. Ben is the Director of Healthcare Product Management at Ordr. Previously, Ben worked as the Director of Clinical Equipment Systems and Project Support at SSM Health St. Louis, Missouri. With more than 15 years of experience in healthcare technology management, his wealth of knowledge in the clinical engineering space allows him to be a wonderful advocate for Ordr healthcare customers. Ben is also a certified biomedical equipment technician. Our next speaker is David Yaeger. Dave has 18 years of experience with ACCE Healthcare as a local Milwaukee service engineer working on CR equipment, printers, and PACS. Dave worked at ProHealth Care as a PACS administrator for 10 years before moving to his current position of Biomed Security DBA 3 years ago. Dave is currently maintaining a cybersecurity program at ProHealth Care to identify medical devices attached to the network. This program is intended to accurately identify, profile, and risk analyze these medical devices to watch for cyber vulnerabilities, which will allow us to take steps to quickly mitigate any additional risks. Our third speaker is Eric Ross. Currently, Eric is with mHealth Fairview as the System Director of Clinical Engineering. Over the past 5 years in this role, he has worked to integrate the medical device management model and across a 12 hospital system. By aligning policies, procedures, and practice, the previously independent service teams are working together as a system to deliver more efficient health care of medical devices and achieve improved performance metrics aligned with industry benchmarks. The future holds ample opportunity to improve partnerships between internal mHealth Fairview service groups. Harmonization across divisions is intended to better align with new technologies as well as respond to today's customer expectations. The goal is to develop a medical device management operation that supports an excellent patient care experience. Today's session description is healthcare organizations have continued to be impacted by the rise in connected devices on their networks. And despite the healthcare technology management, cybersecurity, and information technology teams sharing some of the same objectives, many of the organizations still have barriers to reaching the common objective of medical device security. When it comes to developing a medical device security strategy, it takes a village. Join Eric Ross, System Director, Clinical Engineering of mHealth Fairview, David Yaeger, Biomed Security DBA at ProHealth Care, and Ben Stock, Director of Health Product Development at Ordr, in a fireside chat on how to build a successful medical device security program. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Kamisha. I appreciate the introductions. Real quickly, kind of a brief overview of what we're dealing with in the industry today. There are so many more devices that are on the network now. We didn't used to see infusion pumps. They were just infusion pumps. Now they're on the network. Now they're receiving drug libraries and even updates over the internet. And it is more important than ever that we ensure that these devices are secure, being on the network and providing valuable patient care. This slide goes into some of those devices, but it also makes you think about what other devices are on the network that can be affecting the medical devices and what we can do to protect those medical devices from being attacked directly or being attacked through these other types of systems that are on the network with them. Next slide, please. In the hospitals, there's multiple players, and everyone is going to tell you they care about security, but everybody has a little bit of a different approach on how they look at it. These are the four main players. Leadership really is worried about reputation and keeping the patients safe and the reputation of the organization whole by not allowing any kind of bad actors or threats into the organization. Network and security have basically the same approach. They want to keep people out, but they're concerned about the network, the security of the assets, the security of patient health information, which is also a concern of HTM and Biomed. But Biomed has always been concerned about the safety of the patient. And all of these groups have the same goal to keep people safe. But bringing them together and agreeing on a process to do that has been very difficult over the years. Next slide, please. This is kind of an overview of what I just spoke about, the key points that each of these departments and teams in the healthcare system want to focus on, and what their ideal thought of security is different. But we all have the same common goal. Leadership, ensure that all the devices are connected, ensure that we can provide the care that we need, ensure that we have the data to make smart financial decisions about what we have and where we should add and take away assets. Security and IT, identifying the top IoT, IOMT unmanaged devices and how to secure them. Understanding how each device on the network, managed or unmanaged, communicates, what it's communicating with, when and why, and building policies to protect these devices, the ones that are the difficult ones to manage, that we can't install antivirus on, that we cannot run active scans on to see what the vulnerabilities are. And Biomed, the same things that they've done all the time. They've got to maintain a accurate device inventory. And in this world where medical devices are becoming less expensive and physicians are buying their own medical devices, this becomes a pretty monumental task, in that medical devices could be in your hospital, on your network, and you don't even know they're there. And keeping track of what the devices, the vulnerabilities, the recalls. It's not just FDA recalls anymore. There are many different types of industries that are producing reports of vulnerabilities that need to be tracked. And gaining a understanding of how these IoT devices are being used on the network. Knowing what's plugged in, where it's plugged in, and what it's doing. Next slide, please. This is a brief overview of Ordr and what it can do to help in all of those areas. We'll leave the slide up for just a couple minutes or so while we start our conversation for you to look at, and then we'll take it off the screen because we don't want that distraction. We'll go ahead and start, and we have some questions. I welcome any additional questions to be typed in. We will get to them if time allowed, but I will work them into the conversation as we have time. So David and Eric, your organizations have developed a slightly different structure to support your medical device needs, security needs. We'll start with David. Can you explain what the structure is and some of the positive and negatives that you've experienced with it?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Ben, and thanks for everybody who's listening. The first thing, I guess, we started with, well, my boss had started trying to get a dedicated position that I ultimately filled. And probably about 3.5 years ago, and then maybe even 4 years ago, and then WannaCry hit, and all of a sudden leadership said, hey, why don't you have a Biomed Security guy? And so they finally approved that position, put me in place. And in my instance, I have IT background. I was a PACS administrator previous to this, and I already knew my IT department. So for us, it was a pretty smooth transition for me to get into this position. I needed to learn the biomed equipment. I knew the imaging side of the equipment, being a PACS administrator, but had to learn that the biomed side itself. But for me, the positives were that I already knew the IT team. I got thrown into or added to regular meetings with the security team, with the networking teams. And so it was real smooth transition for us to kind of do that. And so for me, not necessarily security related, I also get a lot of emails detailing the IT, including change tickets and what's taking place on a particular day. So to make sure that it doesn't affect our biomed equipment and our networked equipment. So the other thing we did is, first thing that I was tasked to do is find an application to monitor the network for all things networked, basically. And that's how we ended up with Ordr.
Eric, give us your experience.
Hello, I'm Eric Ross, and thank you, Ben, and audience. So like a lot of large organizations, we're multi-layered and somewhat segmented in our operations, but we're currently on a mission or a plan to streamline that, become a system, become an enterprise that acts together. You know, at the layer that we're talking about with clinical engineering and IT, we're still mostly independent departments. And the positives to that is, you know, we still have really a great depth of expertise. When it comes to a specific modality, a type of product, we've, you know, got some consistency in management across those specific fleets. But there, you know, it's not an optimized way of operating. So we're looking at better partnerships, trying to combine our efforts, or at least have joint policies and procedures, because we run into those challenges of multiple stakeholders and conflicting priorities that comes with that. Sometimes it's a question of ownership. You know, there is a benefit, I suppose, that comes from the democratic effect of diversity, but you know, it also can be too many cooks in the kitchen. So we are an organization with a lot of really smart people in different groups, and we're working really hard to come together to have a more aligned strategy in our medical device and all device. You know, it's not just medical devices; it's everything within our infrastructure that has a network presence. We're working hard to come together. How's that?
That's a good answer. David, anything you'd like to add?
No, we're good.
Can we go ahead and take the slides down and just get them out of the way? All right. So, you know, as we've been talking about, security in medical devices is extremely complex. Can you discuss, we'll start with Eric this time, can you discuss some of the policies and procedures that you've put in place to ensure security while avoiding any kind of interruptions to patient care?
So this is an area where we have independent policies in the different service divisions within our organization. And when I talk about coming together, this is a very current and important area where we're developing joint policies where we have clinical engineering and our IT groups at the table together, coming up with our programs, our procedures. We're interested in prevention or risk mitigation, so finding strategies to keep bad things from happening in the first place is part of it. But the other part of it is making sure that we've got a good response mechanism in place. you know, we want to make sure that we include our risk department, our privacy offices. And then, whereas in the past, we might have made independent decisions depending on the equipment or the procedure, we are coming together to make joint decisions. And this can be anything as simple as what are the latest alerts or viruses out in the world, and how do we make sure that we're protected against that? Do we have the right tools in place to know what's going on in our environment? And if an occurrence does present itself, do we know what to do upon that occurrence? So there's a lot of work very actively going on right now.
David, same question. Would you like me to repeat it, or?
No, I got it. So I'm taking a little different tact. I think Eric took it from a corporate standpoint, which is fantastic. I'm going to take it from an internal, I guess, my role aspect of it. And so our big initiative that was probably started about a year and a half ago from our IT security team is been to segment like devices on our network, switches, trying to isolate them from being able to be talked to and from things that are not supposed to be talking to it. So we use ACL's access control lists created by Ordr, and this restricts the medical devices, how they talk on our network and who can access them. So in other words, a radiology ultrasound machine should not be able to connect to the internet externally or talk with other servers internally if it's not in their necessary workflow. That's one thing that we're striving to get. Now, we've just had a vulnerability come out with GE passwords. I'm sure people are aware of those. So we're actively working on segmenting those correctly and getting those isolated as well. And so we create this ACL and add it to our ICE application. We have Cisco ICE application and for a NAC, and that regulates our network traffic. So we then apply this policy to set the devices based on either MAC addresses, OUIs, or some other specifying characteristics. And then other controls that we're using or we're trying to implement or starting to implement it with vendor support is LDAP authentication, if that's available on the machines, encryption of data drives and transmissions, changing default passwords when applicable, and actually locking down USB slots on devices. We've got USB keys. So that's some of the things we're doing, Ben.
And those are some of the procedures you're taking. What do you have in line of policies as far as what you would do if those for some reason did fail and there was an event? You have predetermined policies outlining what would happen after that.
Yeah, Eric kind of hit it on the head. I mean, that's actually controlled by our IT and leadership departments. There is a response control team that would gather, and it includes all sorts of different folks. I am one of the participants. That includes lawyers, communication experts, security team, leadership. There's just a policy. There is one in place. I'm not going to be able to recite it verbatim, but I think you get the gist of it.
Yeah, and with ransomware being more in the news lately, and kind of the one of the heavy hitters as far as when hospitals being attacked, what are you? We can do so much. Are you doing anything in the way of backup policies or anything to recover from a ransomware attack that you could share?
Yeah, I can. I mean, all the necessary, well, from the IT perspective, again, medical devices typically don't need a necessary backup, and we back up the configurations and stuff of that nature on imaging devices. But from a data standpoint, anything from the IT department, the servers are backed up and redundant. All the NAS is backed up and it's redundant in two different, separate locations. So, yeah, I mean, that's more of a strict IT question. And to get any more details to that, I would be speculating on what they're doing.
All right, thanks, David. Eric, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I would just say that having redundant server warehouses is a strategy Fairview, ML Fairview has employed. There's some investigation ongoing with cloud-based solutions because it is recognized that our data, especially patient healthcare information, is one of the most valuable things we manage.
Thank you. With the increased exposure we're seeing in the news about medical devices and security, do you think that is a positive or a negative for our industry? Go ahead and start with Eric, please.
Yeah, I definitely see it as a positive. I think this is a very real concern and a growing problem, and the increased awareness of it as a challenge is really important, even for people who are not directly involved in managing these areas. I also would like to believe that it puts some of the potential attackers on alert, that we know their strategies and we're actively engaged in building defenses for it. So definitely it's a positive.
Yeah, I wholeheartly agree with that. I mean, to be a little selfish, I wouldn't be in this position if WannaCry didn't come out when it did. So, but yeah, I think IT is happy that in my instance that there's somebody looking over the medical device world, just because it was a black void. You know, there's a void that they just couldn't get their hands around. They're really good with servers and workstations and things that are managed by them, but when they get outside the unmanaged, then their nerves, the hair on the back of their neck gets a little stand-upish, I guess, if you would.
What would you say the key struggles are still with getting leadership to understand the risks to the medical devices?
I'll start with that. I guess the only thing that I continue to voice up is vendors' responses. I think that's always been my biggest struggle, and in relationship to that, I guess that would be management's biggest struggle too. I mean, and let me explain a little bit more on that. I mean, we have vulnerabilities that come out, and I'm still looking for patches for things that came out 2 years ago from certain vendors. So getting those patches in a timely manner is really important. I think, you know, other struggles would be is for management to actually look for vendors that are actively more aligned with security issues that are out there when they're in the procurement process. I think that would be a good thing for all environments to work with a vendor that's, you know, that's a little bit more aligned in regulations and security pro forma than just, you know, looking at the bells and whistles of their application.
Eric?
Yeah, I think David covered some of the really key areas that everyone is struggling with. And I'm really happy to say that mHealth Fairview is investing in the tools and the resources needed to mitigate some of these risks. But I think that's also a barrier in the industry in general, is it's not really clear what the return on that investment is. You know, the concept of securing your infrastructure is sometimes an abstract one, and there aren't really dollars identifiable to, you know, what you're avoiding. But I think that's changing, and I think that's improving, so that there is a better way to quantify why investing in these tools and in these resources has a definite financial impact or a benefit. So, and then I'd just like to echo what David said about the speed of implementation, not only just getting the tools in place and the strategies identified, but absolutely getting the vendors on board with, you know, being engaged in these solutions as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking it's very similar. David brought up pre-procurement, and it is essential that HTM and IT get involved in the pre-procurement process. If you're not, you're doing yourself a very big disservice.
Right.
Vendors are more likely to respond to you before you write the check than after you write the check.
Yeah.
So if we are not putting their feet to the fire and making them deliver on security standards and promises that they need to be delivering on before we buy it, it's going to be twice as difficult after we make the purchase. So organizations really need a process where HTM, IT, security are all considered when making a purchase.
Let me expand on that a little bit, Ben. We are,
Sure.
we are, as most companies now are in our budget cycle. It seems like we're always in a budget cycle, but we being Biomed are asked to look at every capital request that's put through the system. And so I sit in on that. It takes probably, over the course of a month or so, whatever number of things we have. And I'm looking for, is it running Windows 10 already? Or is it running the newest software? And, what kind of wireless connectivity does it have? And so the other thing that we're doing along what you just said was when we're sitting down and writing the contract, we're trying as best we can to have the vendor instill a upgrade path covered to get to the next version of Windows if it is, because as we know, medical devices last 15, 16, 17, 20 years in some instances, and OSs are probably 4 or 5 years. So you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 cycles of OSs potentially. And if you're on the hook now for having to pay the vendor again for the next version when this first one comes out of service, then it's just something you potentially could be avoiding.
I mean, you should always buy the expensive service contract and they'll take care of that for you.
Yeah. They would love that. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw some questions in from the audience here. Christina asks, how many employees do you have assigned to patching and managing vulnerabilities for medical devices in your respective organizations?
Mine's easy. 1.
Yeah. So how does that work? Obviously, you're not going out and physically patching all these devices. What processes do you have to help assist Biomed to get what they need?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I do reach out to vendors. I do all the legwork, I guess. Let me put it that way. So if it's a Microsoft vulnerability patch, then it's pretty straightforward to get it from Microsoft websites. If it's a patch that's coming from the vendor, then I've got access to their websites or communications to the correct people from their technical side and get that downloaded. If my engineer needs assistance, then I actually do get out and help them with it. Just based off my experience with Windows and with patching and stuff of that nature. So it is a one-on-one singular decision made on particular devices if I'm going to be the role or play the role of patcher, or if it's going to be pushed off to the Biomed engineer.
Eric, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to give exact numbers, but I would say we have quite a few people dedicated to, tracking potential vulnerabilities. And then we have a pretty large team available to install patches and that sort of thing. But it's currently very manual, which makes it slow and a bit frustrating at times.
Okay. Mario, I will get back to your question, but this one kind of plays into that. Do you get the vendors to vet the patches and compatibility for all equipment? So I think the question is, are you waiting for the manufacturer to vet all the patches, or sometimes when the risk is too high, do you determine that you should take the risk and just do the patches, whatever is available from Microsoft?
I'll field that first. So a couple of things on that. I know FDA came out probably 2, maybe even 3 years ago now, saying that the vendors couldn't hide behind the patch is going to change my functionality, platform. So they're a little bit more hurried in getting those out. I'm not. I guess I don't take the approach that if it's not vetted by the vendor, that I'm going to just patch it without their authorization. So if it's a severe enough patch, what we would probably go is the segmentation role and try to make sure we can prevent anything else from talking to it.
Eric?
Yeah, so, we certainly rely on the vendor's work to vet the software and, that they're recommending to us. But our IT group also has an internal vetting process before we deploy it out into the world. So that's some of the speed issues, but it increases the security and the reliability once the patches and so forth are pushed out. Where that gets really tested, of course, is if we have a very urgent or a highly critical, event that occurs, then we have to really speed all that up, sort of as a one-off event, which we have done in the past. But on a routine basis, it's not a speedy process.
I think this one's directed at Eric. You made a comment about cloud services. What cybersecurity policies, procedures need to be put in place when using cloud services, whether it's the storage of PHI or protecting data analysis and medical systems?
I would say a short answer is, what's that?
That's kind of a loaded question. It's difficult.
Well, it is, and I'll say right up front that I'm not the expert in this area, so I might not give you the full and complete answer that you're looking for, but I do agree that there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done in the relationship between us and the cloud service provider. I know we have a large team, both from a subject matter expert as well as a legal and risk perspective doing that work, and I would be I'm just not in a good position to comment on the detail of that. It's not my area of expertise. Although I do recognize it's a powerfully good question and a very important one.
David, anything to add?
No, not really. Again, I think with Eric's comments, it's more on the IT side of the world, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't have any great answers either. I came from an organization that was moving to a cloud first type of mentality, and it was a very difficult decision whether to house PHI locally or allow it to have access to cloud services. I think as we move with the EHRs that are available out there as a platform, most of them are cloud-based at this point in time for any economy of scale. I think we're going to see more and more companies being comfortable with cloud as a solution, but we do need to work with that encryption both at rest on the cloud and then also in transit over the internet. We just have to make sure we're meeting the standards that need to be there so that information is not grabbed in transit. So great question. I don't think we're necessarily the platform to answer it fully, but hopefully we got you some things going on there. Does anyone have a test environment for your medical equipment network like IT? So a network where you can, I would assume it would probably just be a VLAN at this point in time, but it could be a physical network to bring medical devices online before they go on the live network.
I did not.
We do. We have a small lab set up, but it is not a formal process. It's a bit we just have some enthusiasts, if you will. I mean, it's very rigorous and it's well executed, but it exists because we have people passionate about this kind of work. We think it's very valuable, and I don't have any examples of where we've discovered anything phenomenal through it, but I think it gives us confidence that we are able to test equipment before we put it out in the wilderness.
And previous slide, we didn't have a test network, but we did make it a policy that anytime we brought a new device on the network, before the vendor left and before we accepted responsibility for the product, we did a rapid 7 scan with it on the network. So that way there was no patient involved, there was no risk. And if anything did happen, then the manufacturer was on site to take a look at it. So that gave us kind of that active scan data with minimizing the risk of affecting a patient or the piece of equipment. I thought it was a pretty good policy while we were doing it. over the last couple of years, what do you think is the most significant improvement to medical device security? And what are some of the key areas we need to focus on as we move forward?
You want it? Or want me to start?
Go for it, David.
So I think the vendors have actually gotten the message that security needs to be built into their systems to stay competitive. Having said that, there's still a lot more that needs to be done with them. But what I've seen recently is the devices coming PEEP capable for wireless connectivity, LDAP authentication capable, so we can restrict who's accessing the devices. Just to name a couple of those. And encryption seems to be the standard now. So many vendors are using embedded OSs to strip out parts of the OS that are not necessary for their devices to accomplish its goal. So there's a few things that I can think of. One that still needs to be addressed is a big key is SBOMs, software bill of materials. It's still critical to understand as vulnerabilities are not always directed towards the operating system. There's vulnerabilities coming out for Flash or Java, Adobe, or some other things, some other softwares that are added to the system. So I think having a vendor describe what other third-party applications are running in that in that process would be helpful to us to document.
Eric?
Yeah, I think David hit on some key tools. I'm not aware of any specific developments or products that I can speak of directly. I kind of took this question at more of a general level, recognizing that the continuous progress in technology, both software and hardware, is aligned with making the products more secure, which is fairly new in recent times. There was more of a trust in end users and less of a problem in our environment. And it is driving changes in the technology implementation. So I do recognize that, but at kind of a high level, I think we need to continue to focus on a bunch of A words here, the awareness. I think we need to see some additional improvements in analytics, that is collecting information we know, comparing notes broadly, then automating some decisions based on those analytics. What actions do we take when we learn of risks and vulnerabilities? How do we inform not only the manufacturers, but ourselves? And, kind of a looming concept out there is this idea of where can we integrate and implement AI or artificial intelligence, which is really just problem solving at a very sophisticated level. And I think there's a place for that in the future as well. It's not that we want to remove the people part of monitoring the security of our equipment, but I think it is such a large and complicated process that we do need these tools to help us and to perhaps suggest decisions on what do we do when a vulnerability occurs, and can we maybe design some of those features right into the equipment.
Yeah, things are fast right now. Vulnerabilities hit fast. So if you're waiting, it's probably going to be on a weekend, right? So
right.
The on-call person's not going to be able to manage all that equipment at the same time. So yeah, AI is necessary.
You joke about that, but it's been shown that the hackers will get into the network and they'll play around for days and days, and they'll wait until Friday 5-6 o'clock at night to start doing anything, just knowing that everybody has left work, doesn't want to come back in. And if they see something that they might question, they'll just say, oh, it'll be there till Monday. So it's gotten a lot more sophisticated and become a business, which is something that I think people don't understand, that these people on the other end are professionals, and this is their job to create this environment where they can profit off of it. And when you start looking at it that way, it's, it becomes our job to stop them, which it was before, but it was a little different of an environment. We had one question come through chat. It said, what about Linux? I'm guessing why the question is more around, we used to see Unix, Linux prominently. A lot of GE products, Siemens products used it. And now they've all moved mostly to Windows-based operating systems. Do you have any input or thoughts on why that is?
Why the vendors move to Windows, I would think maybe a cost thing, but that would be speculation on my part. But maybe to the broader question of Linux, I mean, in my expertise, I guess, if you will, the Linux application is usually not attacked as much as Windows is. So to me, it's a little bit more secure. And actually, it begs the question if a vendor would like to stay more secure, why they would go away from a non-attacked version versus going to Windows, which seems to be a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of technical comments on that, but I am familiar with the question. So, an open platform that is less widely used is a smaller target, perhaps, but I think it's a matter of time. If one operating system became popular versus another, it would just become the new target. But I think in our organization, the presence of Linux is very, very small, and therefore a smaller target here. Windows obviously is the most popular and predominant solution, which makes it a huge target. But I just think our defenses will have to rise to the occasion.
Ben, I was just thinking while Eric was talking, it may be that it's a dying breed. Linux and Unix might be a little bit more difficult to code from a medical device perspective. And again, it's speculation, but maybe that there's more engineers out there to understand Windows than there is Linux.
Yeah, a lack of developers to develop the platform would drive you away from that. Definitely a good point. A question also came in. What are some tips to give to someone who's just looking to start out in the biomed cyber field?
Well, that's a good question. IT experience is I won't say a must, but very beneficial. Understanding how, I guess, systems work or applications and OSs work together and how they're talking on the network. I was fortunate that I kind of went through the IT world and came over to Biomed, so I didn't really have to do any research or specific training on IT side, but I would suspect that there's some good training materials out there. And I would bet that there's probably a lot of free stuff out there. You can just immerse yourself in some cybersecurity documentation and some practices that are already in. And I would bet that the government would probably actually have a lot to, our federal government would have a lot to, through NIST and through the FDA might have some good resources to be able to get to pinch off of.
Yeah, I would add to that a perspective of a person who's looking to just get into the career or someone who's already in it, you have to do your homework, and the homework never ends, frankly. It's one of the fun things about this line of work is there's always something new to learn. And in my mind, the interconnectivity of equipment, the management of information, just the network technology itself is vitally important for a classic biomed technician. I see the legacy biomed world, clinical engineering world as focused on hardware, where the legacy IT is kind of a virtual or software focused world. But I think it's pretty assured that those two worlds are well entrenched with one another and are going to continue to rely on each other more and more. So I would suggest learning both. You could probably get by with a good, healthy career either or, but I think you'll be much more successful with learning both sides.
And I'll echo, just from my personal experience, I had to build a program from the ground up. And I started with a biomed who was very computer savvy and tried to get them to learn the security side of it. And it didn't work out very well. And I think it comes from the fact that there was very little resources for that person to rely on to learn the security side. And when I went at a second time, I hired someone who had an extensive security experience with little biomed experience, but we had the biomed experience to teach that person. So we had a wide variety of biomed experience that person could rely on to learn the medical equipment, learn the medical protocols and so forth. And they already knew the security stuff. So if you are in biomed and you want to move into a field, you can't rely on the security team at your facility that you're working with to teach you what you need to know. You need to go out and actively pursue a degree, not even a full degree, but classes to understand the ins and outs of security, because it is extremely complex and you do have to immerse yourself in it to understand it fully.
But don't be scared.
No, that's
Go
correct.
for it.
Just learn it.
Yep.
So one of the kind of, overwhelming things is that we talked about, especially with David being one person, is a lack of resources being dedicated to device security in the organizations. What are some of the things you do to ensure the resources that you do have are being utilized properly and being utilized to their fullest? Let's start with David.
Yeah, so whenever I talk about this topic, my first suggestion is to have a good inventory documented somewhere. Hopefully within a software, some sort of a software application, not necessarily on a Rolodex or a spreadsheet. It's just so integral to a biomed shop that you have, documentation and inventory documented, I should say, just because you need to know where things are. And so we've built a complete informatics page on in our CMMS dedicated to basically my role. So what the IP address, what the MAC address is, what it's connected to, what is the licenses that are involved in that, who it integrates with, if it's RPACs or CPACs, if it's just Epic, whatever the case may be. And these details go a long way. We actually include, the jack ID that's plugged into the wall, what switch port that's connected to. So if we have a networking issue, we can talk to the networking team and tell them specifically what they're connected to and how quickly to get to it. So those details will help shorten the vulnerability gap that we were talking about earlier, how long it may take to resolve or react to a vulnerability. So invest in a software application that can identify medical devices and other IoT. So, basically Ordr. They reside on our network. So the more visibility you have is definitely going to better prepare you for what you can do. So this is actually why we teamed with Ordr, and we're actually developing an API between Ordr and our CMMS to assist in that too. So, we talked earlier about AI or artificial intelligence or automation. If we have an API built between the two systems and Ordr is developing or found a vulnerability that was delivered to them from a federal government, well, Ordr can now tell me what devices are vulnerable to that particular vulnerability and communicate that to the CMMS and potentially directly create work orders for us to work on. So we talk about automation, you talk about lack of resources, this just strips that away. So you just go ahead and the system will do a lot for you, and then you can actually turn your focus right on to the piece of equipment that needs attention.
Eric, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think I could improve on how David described the need out there. I agree that, again, historically, the accuracy of our databases wasn't as good as it needs to be today. And the content or the asset records we need a lot more information in those asset records as well. But then comes the challenge of managing all of that, keeping it current, studying the utility of our equipment. Not only is it safe, is it known to exist, but what's it doing out there? I mean, those are all valuable analytics that we didn't need so much in the past, or we didn't know that we needed, but we basically can't live without today. So mHealth Fairview is also implementing Ordr. We have a couple of different databases currently in use. So we're working on how we're going to bridge some of those divides. But I think it hasn't been fully proven on the medical device side of it because it's fairly new here. But I think the promise is definitely there, and the goals are very important to pursue. When I think about resource or the lack thereof, one way to manage that is to make the need for ongoing financial costs or personnel involvement less. And again, automating through powerful tools is one way to do that. But also demonstrating that we can build a more reliable, confident building environment will just sort of generate a desire to keep the investment solid in those solutions. So I think one helps the other. I mean, ultimately, we're here to create a great patient experience. And I think having the good tools and the good processes behind the scenes and the confidence, that we're solid helps to deliver that experience.
So we have one last question here that I think we're gonna be able to squeeze in. It's for David. What recommendations do you have for HCM departments to follow when the vendor has identified I think this is supposed to be a cyber threat, but has not yet developed a security patch?
New vendor? No, just kidding. Yeah, I think I spoke about it a little bit earlier. The best approach to that would be, depending upon what the cyber vulnerability is, if it's most likely going to be some sort of an access potential that they could, exploit something that's already embedded into the OS or software. The best way is to, the only way I can think of while waiting for the vendor is to segment it on our network and just figure out, with Ordr's help, figure out what the normal network flows are, and isolate that particular device group to only talk through those known and normal communication paths.
Yeah, I have to, I think this is kind of the thing where IT and HTM different is, an IT sees a threat on an IT device, they just isolate that device and remove it from the network.
Right.
With a medical device, that's not an option specifically. If you have a cath lab that's experiencing some kind of a threat, the threat is not the issue. There could be a patient on the table, and you isolating that from the network could cause harm to that patient. So I think like that isolation is where we're at now going forward. Being able to ensure that device can only communicate the devices it absolutely has to communicate with, and removing its access to external internet connections and so forth, unless they're absolutely necessary, is the only way we can protect those devices that do not, we don't have the patches available for, or it's too risky to put the patches on. Erica, give you a couple minutes. We're going to wrap up here shortly. Anything you'd like to add?
Nope. We'll go with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to kind of add real quick to Mario. I throw that out there like it's an easy process. It's not an easy process to segment a device, but it is a necessary evil in some instances.
yeah, isolation or zero trust, that kind of thing. I mean, it's been talked about for years. And I'm yet to come across an organization that says, "Oh, we've got this. We've got it figured out."
Exactly.
No one does. So if you're in an organization and you're looking at zero trust, isolation, that kind of stuff, and you're struggling, that's the norm. It is very difficult. It's very difficult to isolate something and still keep it functional, and make it safe at the same time. So that's why we're here. That's why we have jobs. That's why there's products like Ordr out there to assist with that kind of a task. Kamisha, could you pull up the slides again real quick, please? We'll go over the last slide, and I think we're right on time.
Good thing. Give me one moment. There we go.
Okay, and then the next slide. So if you are interested at all in Ordr, here's an opportunity to bring an Ordr sensor into your organization at no cost, 30-day trial, risk-free. It's extremely simple to sign up. You just go to the URL right there, ordr.net/sensor. Very simple process to fill out. You get a sensor. We will not bug you incessantly. We'll give you a phone call, make sure everything's working all right. But we will, that sensor it's a very small device. It doesn't take much payload. It'll allow you to give you an example of what Ordr can do in your network. And if you have any questions about that, there's ways to reach out on the website. So I don't think we have any more questions that we missed there. Kamisha, anything to add at the end?
Yes, if you are not a member of ACCE, we invite you to join. I'm going to add the link right here to the bottom. We also have the link for Ordr. Ordr's website has also been added to the chat. And if you could please complete the survey at the end of the webinar. If nothing else, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists and Ordr for their wonderful presentation today. I hope everyone got to learn a little bit. I know I did. So thank you all.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon or morning, depending on where you are.